welcome to the Open Air Podcast, Olympics edition. My name is Devang Desai, and I'm joined, as always, by Mr. Simon Bush. Oh, Bush, almost halfway through the Paris Olympics. Give me a vibe check. How are you enjoying them so far?
Oh, it's been great. I have watched a truly staggering amount of content in the first 5 days as we sit here and recording. I am a true Olympic junkie. I can't get enough of it, which is probably not a good thing, really. I need to learn to dial it back somewhat.
No, it's been great. Definitely been struggling trying to find things and where they're playing, but the CBC Gem app has been a lifeline.
I will say I've been full VPN. I mentioned on the podcast that I'm BBC on one screen and CBC on the other. It's worked like an absolute charm for me. Had the BBC stream going, had the CBC at the same time.
Which one have you preferred so far?
There really is there's no comparison to. The CBC is very, very poor, I would say. Like some of its coverage in terms of how many sports you can watch is really, really good. Like you can just find a stream of an event going on, and that's great. But their main channel coverage, I find really kind of very weak in comparison. And I know there's a funding gap difference and all the different things, but the BBC's ran circles around it from my perspective.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of praise for CBC in these parts. I do think like the live programming has been tough though, in that like prime time slot, which falls in the afternoon for us. Like I feel like playing things live and indicating when things are live have been a bit hit or miss, but I have been enjoying being able to find whatever sport I want through that app. So
have you been enjoying
I think
Ozempic ads and gambling ads and RBC ads?
That's a story for another day. If you watch any sport, really, that's continuous, except for soccer, because it is on pay channels now. Golf, it happens. F1, it happens here, right? I'm not sure why people are surprised. Maybe I've been too desensitized.
I think it's just because it is the national broadcaster. I think if you come from a position where you don't have advertisements or that kind of thing, and then to see it plastered all over your national broadcaster with gambling commercials, it's not the greatest look in the world.
It's fair. I was trying to remember. Well, that's the thing, though. We were kind of at the whim of whatever they decided to show back in the day. Mm-hmm. Like we weren't aware of what they were not showing, really, until it was maybe put in the newspaper. So I know it's not necessarily related to your advertising comment, but it's changed a lot. I do marvel at just like the logistics of pulling this off. And I do think there are some elements of this that I marvel at as people we've done this kind of thing. So I think not to this scale, but I think it's like, I just appreciate the madness that it takes to pull this off as well. So I don't know. I'm fully game spilled. I know I'm not being objective here in terms of how I'm approaching how much I've enjoyed the Olympics so far. Cause like there have been bad things. So we're going to talk about them, but let's talk about the tennis. Cause I think there is a good portion of good and bad maybe from Roland-Garros so far, Bush.
I think so. Yeah. I think it's been an entertaining event. It's not often that you get to see something like the doubles or the mixed doubles take priority viewing, like it has on a number of these broadcasters. To have some of these big names playing in the doubles discipline, I think has drawn attention to it. But you've had big names going out. You've had big names looking old and washed, and you've had some retire as well. So it's been a good few days of watching the sport.
It has. Let's start with the women's side. And we're going to kind of do this in a half-week check-in. So we'll talk about what's happened. But the biggest stories so far, I think one of them being Angie Kerber and her career coming to an end after another incredible run. We saw a bunch of great runs from the elder statesman of the game, but Angie Kerber falling to Zheng Qi-wen in an epic three-setter. Kerber had a bunch of great matches here, Bush. It's fitting she went out this way, as she was one of the best match producers of her era. Yeah, goodbye to a great. She's my age too, so I definitely feel like part of me is dead with this Angie Kerber retirement.
Cutthroat from Zheng, you could say. We'll cross that bridge in a second. So Angie Kerber, obviously a 3-time slam champion, a former world number 1. She joined Li Na in being only the second woman past the age of 28 to win her first 2 Grand Slams, which is a fantastic achievement. Oldest player to make a debut at world number 1 as well. Really just a very, very good player, and one who is testament to longevity and consistency and staying with it. And I think if you were to circle a player for people to sort of emulate who have been around the tour and have never quite ascended to the top of it, she's one to really use as hold up and use as a marker for that, because her career is defined by the second half of it, which is something that you can't say for a lot of the top players.
No, that's a really good point. 2016, man, if she had won that Olympic final, which she probably should have against Monica Puig. Monica Puig's run in Rio will go down as one of the most incredible things we've ever seen. But if Kerber wins gold there, that 2016 season goes down as one of the greatest ever. Correct? I think so. That's 2 slams. She made a final at Wimbledon. She had a blip at the French Open. I don't think she was ever really a threat at the French, which makes her run here at the end kind of interesting. But that 2016 Bush was insane.
It was, yeah, and it's one of those things that you always have to check history on this one when we say it's one of the greatest runs of all time, and then you remember that Monica Seles and Steffi Graf, Chrissy Evra, Martina Navratilova existed, Serena Williams, Venus Williams. There's been some very, very good years for women's tennis at the top of the women's sport, but this is right up there. It really was, in terms of reaching heights, a game which I don't think was modeled on power, as much more about precision, counter-punching, maneuverability of the ball around the court. Someone who was really quick and possessed a really, really good brain as well. So just a really quality person from a tennis perspective, and someone that I think will be missed on tour.
Very well said. Lots of tributes poured out to Angie Kerber following her loss. Going to miss her. I think the match quality she was able to produce is something that we shouldn't gloss over, and I don't think we are. I think it was mentioned on our Discord as well. But when you can really rely on someone to give it their best and also bring out the best in their competitor, it makes for really great viewing. And I feel like Angie Kerber did that more often than not. That quote from Steve Simon, her dedication to the sport of tennis produced results that define her as one of the great players of a highly competitive era. I think that's really true. There was a lot of great players in her day, and yet I think Angie Kerber found a way to stand out. So that is a testament to her abilities, and a big shout out to her.
Do you think her 14 career titles seems low?
Yeah, a little bit. I guess when you consider the significance of the titles she did win, then perhaps that makes sense. But yeah, really, I mean, the big years for her came later, like you said. Like from 2016 onwards is when she began to get recognition. 2018 was another phenomenal year. I think she was nominated for Player of the Year that year as well. But she beat Serena at Wimbledon. So the 2 best years of her career happening after the halfway point. Maybe that makes sense that she wasn't mopping up titles.
I think it does make sense, yeah. I just think we have become so accustomed to top level players racking up 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, you name it, titles, that just being down in the single teens seems just a small amount. But then again, as we've touched on before, and as you just touched on, entirely backloaded. Maybe it isn't surprising that number looks small by comparison to some of her peers.
Speaking of players on their way out, Rafa Nadal, Bush, out in singles, out in doubles as well. Nadal Alcaraz losing to the American team of Krajicek and Rahm. But I think the singles match, you called this. I'm going to give you your flowers, Bush. When everyone was salivating over Novak versus Rafa in round 2, after the draw came out, I think a lot of people were expecting Novak to win. I think that was probably the major sentiment based on current form. But overall, maybe a spectacle is what we had banked on. But you had said, Bush, it was going to be sad. And it mostly was. It mostly was. Aside from like 20 minutes at the end, we saw some glimpses of old Rafa. But yeah, this was Novak beating Rafa in straight sets. And then, like I said, Nadal Carraz going out in doubles. I thought it was nice that Rafa had this moment before the tennis started with the torch and the Eiffel Tower and like all of that. I'm really glad that happened because I felt like it was always going to be sad. The fairy tale wasn't coming. And I think Luke said this on the Discord, but it really is true. Like the parallels to late stage Fed are quite apt. I feel like it's just enough is good enough to make you feel okay after him getting through some wars that never used to be wars against your Martin Fucsovics or whoever. And then when he needs to get better or be much better than he has, he just can't be. And that was the case against Djokovic.
Yeah, I don't know who this tweet was put out by, so my apologies for not finding the handle here, but just crazy facts about the Novak Djokovic-Rafa Nadal rivalry. 2008, the last time Nadal beat Djokovic on a grass court. 2010, the last time that Nadal beat Djokovic on an indoor hard court. 2013, the last time Nadal beat Djokovic on an outdoor hard court. 2013, the last time Nadal won a set against Djokovic on any hard court. Djokovic has not lost to Nadal away from clay since Obama was president in the United States of America. Anyone who thought that this was going to go any different way is either not watching the sport or is incredibly naive.
I'm naive. I thought there was some magic, but it's Jover. It's so Jover. I'm sorry. It's well, do you think he plays the US Open? How about that? He signed up for it.
It's done, right? It's over. So his
it's
just a question of whether or not he wants to.
I just wonder now, like how it was really. I felt like the torch stuff was so perfect. Like this was it. But I don't think he's gonna play at the U.S. Open to get smoked early. You know, so I wonder if he shows up there, but he calls it. Maybe in New York, but it feels over.
He's not a top 30 player anymore. And it's going to be, I know, very harsh and very challenging for a lot of people to hear. But his form since he's played and him coming back has not suggested that this is a person who's remotely capable of competing anymore. And that's fine. His body has broken down. And this seems very unlikely that the trajectory or the direction of travel here is that he's going to come back to winning Grand Slams. All to say, that's totally fine. It's just figuring out what kind of retirement and what kind of end to his career he wants.
Yeah, figuring out how to go. And, you know, I have faith. He seems like a good dude in the sense of not doing things for bullshit reasons for the most part. So, yeah, let's see how this shakes out. But, yeah, Novak still... I'm very confused. From my perspective of someone who's been watching tennis for 25 years... What does he want? What does his retirement look like? Because he's done everything. I would have thought him walking off at Roland-Garros one last time would have been fine. I would have thought that like the Olympic Games would have been fine because he's had so much success there in representing Spain and what he means to her on that court. I would have thought this would have been it. But if not here, then where? Then what is he waiting for? I don't know. Really, yeah.
And he doesn't need to appease me. Like, fuck me in that regard. He doesn't owe it to anyone. But I'm just very curious to know what it is.
I agree with hypothetical Rafa. Fuck you, indeed.
As we should.
Say, but no, it's good. You know, who needs to lose to Zverev is your last memory there, though. So I understand wanting to come back to shake that taste. And if this was always part of the plan, it probably was, right? Like a year ago plus back when he was plotting the end. But now it was announced he was going to be entered at the US Open before the Olympics. But obviously things will change and maybe the manner of how this went down will affect his calculus. But my new take is that he's going to show up to New York but not play and call it there. Because the other thing is like, a lot of people are having their moments. Like Andy Murray's going to have his moment here too. So I don't know if he wants to just fully take over. And he's probably left already, you know? Like, so he's probably in North America soonish after a brief holiday. So I think the end is coming soon. It's not good. Like even before the last 20 minutes against Novak, this felt like one of those things that wasn't good for anyone, even Novak, who... I don't know. He did the violin thing at the end, but I'm like, I don't think this is necessary, sir. Please carry on.
He's going to retire in the place that everyone loves, Cincinnati, Ohio. That's it.
Mason, Ohio.
Western and Southern. That's where it's going to end, everyone.
We'll talk Murray and Dan Evans after the break on parting shots, I think, Bush, unless you want to touch on them now.
Maybe let's do it briefly and just kind of keep it a little separate, just to give Murray his flowers. It kind of does feel like we've been talking about him retiring for the last 6 weeks or so, which is totally fine. I think the way that he's chosen to go out has made complete sense. To wrap up at Wimbledon, to have the send off with his brother, and then for I was gonna make an Emma Raducanu joke, but it's not it feels too soon to make that kind of joke. And then to end up here at the Olympics and to go out at a tournament that he's had so much success, to be a flag bearer. It feels right, and there's been real magic this week as well. It's been very, very entertaining to watch him and Dan Evans' exploits. Co-signed.
Love Dan Evans getting his flowers as well. That's the lovable scamp we always knew he was, which is probably not true at all, right? But this is great stuff. I want to shout out some overall tennis stuff, Simon, and you can too. But just to Felix Auger-Aliassime, who has rescued a very, very bad season, and he like Dylan Brooks, once they put that maple leaf on, something happens, man, because it happened in the Davis Cup. It's happening at the Olympics again. He's now set a mark for Canadian tennis players in terms of how deep they've gone since the sport was brought back in to the Olympic Games. Where did this come from?
Well, that's a comparison that I never thought I would hear, is the Felix Auger-Aliassime to Dylan Brooks one, which shame on me for not finding that this top level journalism that you can't teach. You have it, you're born with it. All that being said, it's good. It's good to see him making. I don't think he's done either here, right? I think he has the potential to cause a shock and keep going. And despite me making fun of it, I think it really is different for players if they've had a shitty year and they find themselves in a completely different situation, because you're not all alone. You're representing your country. You're in a team. It was interesting. I had this conversation with someone the other day, and it was in regards to the sort of Team Canada versus Team GB idea. And because we were watching the British swimmers, and the British swimmers were all talking about how like it's a team event. Like we all support each other despite it being swimming as a singles competitor. And I think the person I was speaking to found it a bit strange coming from. It's like, no, it's not. Like you're still just you're competing for yourself. And I was trying to explain, like, it's kind of, if you're in the camp, it is sort of beaten into you, this idea that you're all supporting each other. You're there in this event and you're representing the flag and as a big team. And maybe that does play a role in someone's psyche going into these events. We've
seen it before with him after poor stretches when he plays for Canada. Something happens. It's awesome to see. I think against Medvedev, who he hadn't beaten 8 attempts, like you'd seen different variations of losses. And I think the one in Australia had stuck in my mind a while. But Simon, he was brilliant serving, absolutely brilliant serving. His return game was aggressive. And I thought he was aggressive in general, and his forehand is such a weapon when it's on. He was full value for the win. I think Med after the match is like, you know what, I didn't play that bad. Like I played pretty well, but Felix was better than me. And it's been a while, since Felix, I think, has done that to someone in the top 5, top 10. So that was awesome. Doubles, like you said, with Gabby Dabrowski. He's going to play for a medal because they made the semifinals there. So awesome stuff.
This is a great draw on both the men's and the women's side, like in singles and doubles and in mixed doubles. There's some fantastic matchups coming on in the second half of the tournament. Like this is not like ye old days of Nicolas Massou winning. Greatest respect. Like Jesus.
That remote live taping in Santiago isn't going to go down. I guess. I
have a really, really good Chilean friend who's going to never talk to me again after saying that. Maybe I'll bleep it from the record.
Anything else tennis-wise?
Not off the top of my head. I think it's been very, very enjoyable. I have really enjoyed watching Krejcikova and Zinyakova play again. That was really enjoyable to watch. So, top line level is just, it's been a fun tournament.
We're going to get to the drama after the break, including Iga, Danielle, Navarro and Zheng, Coco Gauff and the umpires, and Canada and spying. All of that coming up next on Open Era. Welcome back to the Open Era podcast, Simon. We've touched on some of the nicer things, some good moments, things we've liked, but there's been beef at these games. USA grade A beef. The USA behaving badly has been the quote bandied about. This is from Mary Carrillo. Quote, these American women, I think they're running a little wild at these Olympic Games, which sounds a bit much. I think that could be positive as well, because they won a shitload of medals.
It sounds like a Donald Trump quote. That
yeah, I know, honestly, I wasn't sure. But this is in response to a couple of things happening over the past few days, including Danielle Collins and Iga Swiatek slugging away in their quarterfinal match that had to end due to Collins' abdominal injury. I think there was there's an accusation, I guess, from Danielle Collins to Iga being, Simon, what was the word? Disingenuous? Insincere.
Yes. Insincere.
Yeah. Quote, I told Iga she didn't have to be insincere about, my injury. There's a lot that happens on camera, and there are a lot of people with a ton of charisma and come out and are one way on camera and another way in the locker room. And I just haven't had the best experience. And I don't really feel like anybody needs to be insincere, end quote. She keeps going on, but she mentions fakeness afterwards. Quote, they can be the way they are. I can accept that, and I don't need the fakeness. Not the first time this has been whispered about Iga, by the way, Simon. But this was a lot. Like, I think you could see Iga was distressed after their handshake, which was quite something. What was your take on this whole thing?
Well, there's one thing that we can say for certain is that no one will ever accuse Danielle Collins of being fake and insincere in terms of her. We know who she is on court and on off court, which is one thing. The playing at the server's pace stuff was, I think, eventually going to catch up with Iga Swiatek. Someone was always going to punch back on this one. It was kind of inevitable, in the same way that it has caught up with many players across the years. This wasn't a nothing story. I think for the people that are trying to sort of dismiss it and say that it wasn't anything, it felt personal in a way that some of these other stories kind of don't, and seemed like just surface level heat of the moment stuff. It kind of felt like someone burying some bad blood here. So I wonder why. We don't really know, but on the surface of it, it felt a bit more real than some of the other ones to me. Yeah,
the fakeness thing, I think, is something that other players have been alluding to cryptically, in very, very cryptic fashion. But I do wonder if this will maybe give rise to other players speaking up. But I thought it was pretty shocking. I came into it without context, so I saw at the end and then I rewatched the handshake and the highlights afterwards. It was taken aback, but I mean, you're representing your country, so there's the toxic stew of nationalism mixed in there. But B, like, Danielle Collins has had a really big year with a lot of big things happening. And for this tournament to end the way it did due to injury, like, you got to be feeling some type of way about it. So I feel like maybe some grace or some empathy can be delivered her way. And I mean, I didn't feel great for Iga afterwards either. But the pace of play stuff feels like gamesmanship, and there is stuff that Iga has done regarding breaks she has taken and when she has taken them that I think has rubbed her competitors the wrong way as well. So yeah, it's worth talking about for sure.
I think it is. I do also think there's an element of this, which is it is there's a level of disrespect, I think, in terms of almost talking down to someone on court, lecturing someone.
yeah.
That feels unearned, perhaps. Like, I don't think that your personal feelings get to come above the rest of everyone else who's watching a match. Like, I think you can leave that stuff for in the locker room. I think one of the reasons I was saying this felt a bit more real is because I think the manner of it is that it looked like someone trying to make a point in the sense of it's in front of everyone in the Olympic Games, very visibly and audibly to the world. I'm not really a huge fan of people just like fucking lecturing other people on court. It just comes across as a bit patronizing and a bit like infantilizing. So I didn't really appreciate this at all. Even though I do think there's some legitimacy to people taking their time and not playing at service speed and all that sort of stuff. Anyone who's played club level tennis knows what the fuck they're talking about on this one. It's incredibly frustrating, incredibly annoying when you have someone who does it, whilst at the same time, like, be an adult, be a bit of a grown up on this one.
The Emma Navarro Zhang Qiwen beef Bush. Emma Navarro not happy with Zhang following a third set drubbing, and Zhang replying in an incredible spicy manner. I believe the quote from Zhang, I'm trying to dig it up quickly. I will not consider it an attack because she lost the match. Navarro, though, Bush, this is your girl. What's going on here with her comments about Zhang? I didn't like this at all.
I thought this one was down to the crowd more than I think down to Zhang Qiwen. I think it was a boisterous, rowdy, loud crowd who were very vociferously, too many long words in a single sentence. This is why I should never be allowed on the CBC. Who were supporting their athlete, and it was fucking boiling on court as well. So all of that combined.
But basically her response to the net was, I didn't know you had fans, basically.
It was very odd. Yeah, very, very odd.
What are you talking about? Like, that's holy cow. That felt to me like a bit of and I hate to say this, it just felt like a bit of a spoiled brat response, to be honest. But
never from a billionaire.
Maybe I don't hate to say that. JPEG would never. I honestly mean that. I don't think she would do that. So in any case, that
no one would accuse the Chinese fans of not supporting their athletes during this Olympic Games. I think if you've watched enough coverage, they travel in numbers and they travel.
If you see the 10 minutes of the volleyball fan camp, you know that China's fans are doing great stuff. I love those the fan camp stuff in between events at those arenas. So there was that. So there was Emma Navarro, Danielle Collins, and then Coco Gauff-Busch. Now this, I think, is a bit different, because this, I feel like we've seen examples of this happening to Coco a few times now, especially at this exact tournament or this venue, in which she's not getting the benefit of the doubt, and it's clearly frustrating her.
Am I controversial to say that I didn't think the umpire did anything wrong?
No, but I think this is more on like the body of
evidence.
This is not just one instance. Like, I felt bad for Donna Vekic, don't get me wrong, and like we shouldn't have been waiting there. It felt uncomfortable and cringe. But I get why Coco Gauff felt like she was at a loss there, because it has happened to her multiple times. And I think for someone who is by the book and like about sportsmanship, et cetera, like I think this is something that like she finds she's not getting the benefit of the doubt, even though she's done what she's done in the game. And I can understand how that would be frustrating.
Totally, yeah. I think you want to believe this stuff balances out or comes out in the wash as an athlete, is that for as many bad causes that you're going to receive, you're also going to get ones in the opposite direction. I came away from this thinking, can we just fucking go to electronic line calling, please? This is ridiculous.
Yeah, I've had
enough of this. I don't want to keep talking about it, especially when it's the only event that it's happening at.
We have this stuff for the stupidest shit. The least we could do, is implement this for things that matter and that could affect things and cause less stress on everyone involved.
Jesus Christ.
Because like I said, like I don't, yeah, sorry. This is not great for Vekic either as the competitor playing against Gauff.
No, it isn't. Not when you're standing. It was 5.5 minutes, I think, of how long this exchange took.
9,000 degrees or whatever.
And I was reading some things about it of I think, talk about being disingenuous about it, of reading some commentators saying, well, the umpire should have given him a time violation for 5.5 minutes of time. Like, come on, Get your head out your ass on this one. I think a person is entitled to make their point. With all that being said, how many times, Dev, have you ever seen an umpire change their mind after a conversation with a player? I think it's a big fat goose egg. It's happened 0 times in the history of humanity.
Outside of a zany exhibition, 0. So yeah, I'm with you. The Americans, though, I mean, I cheekily named this episode Red, White, and FU, but I do think part of what makes America is this attitude on the world stage. When most people are like, what? And they're like, nah, we're going full in. Like Simone Biles is a good example of this, where she's just now fumigate, like just blazing that ex-gymnast who was talking trash about the US team, and now they are all just, they're winning. And I think that's just so America to me. But then we're getting some instances of the ugly American. And I know we have wonderful American listeners, but I'm curious, like I think there's levels to this obviously, but it's part of what makes them kind of such a catch at these international events, because we need villains. And I do find it like interesting and sort of nice that Canada, or at least the Canadian women's soccer team, is now a villain kind of in Paris.
Yeah, I think the Olympic Games is fascinating because you are representing the flag, and you can have a bunch of narratives attached to that in terms of national identity and how the kind of personality that come. And it's not a monolith. I think anyone who claims that is completely ridiculous. But you do have a very hearty and loud American contingent in the crowd. You might have a slightly more reserved, Japanese section, perhaps with polite applause when their athletes are winning and all this kind of stuff, which, is all stereotypes and it's all leading into different areas. But it's also, one is not better than the other. This is the thing that's always kind of lost in all of this thing of like, you need to act a certain way, you need to support a certain way, you need to play a certain way, or because everyone's going to have their own interpretation of what that looks like on your sort of individualistic versus your sort of community side of things as well. So I think the Olympics are really fascinating for that. No more is that demonstrated than watching the team gymnastics competitions. I think those are fascinating for many different reasons about how those athletes are holding themselves.
The Chinese gymnast in the men's competition, who, what do they call bad teammates, or what not to do in a teammate situation? His teammates deserted this guy after he fell.
That was really rough. That's not what you like to see. I think depending on where you were born and where you grew up and everything, and who you're supporting, whether you associate yourself with a national team or these sort of things, I do think it's interesting how those marks or those things that you think sometimes are either good or bad about how your nation handles themselves, they rise quite a lot during the Olympics, where like I would never consider myself to have like national pride when it comes to Team GB or Team Canada in any capacity. But by God, am I going to get into the spirit of it in the exact way that those teams do whenever they're performing well? And I think that's probably not a good thing. I think that's probably it's maybe not a good reflection on how we are as a society in general.
Well, I think when I was younger, I would have felt like personally attacked by the drone story. I would like FIFA and the French authorities are personally coming after me in my honor as a Canadian soccer person and fan. How dare they, monsters, etc. And because I haven't done that, I found myself relishing their success more and enjoying it more because I'm less bogged down in the minutia of it. And I think it's because I'm less patriotic in the sense of going full on Canada or bust like I might have if this was like 2010 or possibly 2000. Like I remember watching Simon Whitfield win the triathlon in 2000 and feeling fully Canadiana, et cetera, but it also felt like that was part of that era in my life where like that's what fandom was. Whereas now, maybe it's a bit easier to understand like what is contributing to this, how have we made it this far, how is Canada now winning medals in swimming, maybe how are we doing better in track and field, why are we doing better, who's investing the funds. Like I feel like it's a lot more it's a lot easier maybe to feel less invested in like the shame and the glory aspects of this stuff. And I think that's better. Like that's a lot healthier than it used to be.
I mean, I agree. I also think that sometimes it's hard to look at the Olympics outside of the context of modern geopolitical tensions or what the nation state represents. Because I have said numerous times on this podcast how much of a complete stan I am, because in my heart of hearts, there is something incredibly cool about a global sporting competition where it's supposed to be amateurs, right? You are just competing against other nations, and it's supposed to be a celebration. It's supposed to be a festival where everyone comes together and is competitive against each other, and it's done in good nature. Like, I'm obviously accepting very much so that is a romanticized view of what it is, because you can't look beyond all the other things that in the IOC and doping programs and how it's used for soft power. Like, I'm acutely aware of all those things. But at the same time, it should be something that we celebrate, Dev. It fucking should be, because there's something very cool in there and something very sweet and lovable and something very pure about it, which I think is lost so many times. And I really want to believe in it, because if you can't believe in it, then you become cynical about the whole thing.
No, it's really well said. There was an interview with a Canadian swimmer last night with Devin Hariu, the CBC reporter. I believe it was Ingrid Wilm, one of Canada's swimmers. She made the final, but I don't believe she medaled. But she's been a great interview the whole week, and she gave a final interview with Devin, and it was excellent stuff. And it was just like the perfect example of, holy cow, this is a major milestone for this person. They're often... I think the other part of this is getting older, Bush. Like, when I was the age of these people competing, I think I was a little more, I don't know. I think my perspective has changed so much that I appreciate the journey so much more. And to your point, like I don't care so much about winning, and I think this is the one place in sports where that's true for me. And this feels like the healthiest way to consume it. So of all the stuff around the games being obviously toxic and bad, and I mean, there's a laundry list of reasons why you probably shouldn't want your city to host an Olympic Games, but like the other stuff, man, inject it.
And I think if you think about what it means to have national pride, or the things that never get spoken about of what a country actually, is good at, that is not what is presented to the world. Like elements of solidarity and community, arts and culture, sporting achievement, innovation, like all of these things, because there's so many different layers on top of each other. They don't just happen in isolation. Obviously, there's many reasons behind why it happens in a certain way, but it's nice to support your country periodically. It's nice to have a bit of national pride about something, even if it's feeling, somewhat dirty if you're associated with a country that has a somewhat checkered past.
That's well said, sir. Do you want to talk about any other tennis stuff, or let's just go full Olympics?
Yeah, I was going to ask you on this one. Mira Andreeva won a tour title. Let's just say that. She's
cool.
She's 17 years and 90 days. Congratulations to her. She's going to be fantastic. She'll be a slam champion before she's 20. I believe that very strongly. But Dev, let me ask you this question. What did you make of the women's football, the Canadian situation? Because this seems massively... This is a story that's taken up a lot of airwaves, and is a story which has made global news, literally global news, not the broadcaster here. So what was your opinion on this? Do you feel like this is overblown, or do you feel like the FIFA was out to get Canada here?
It's a tough one. I feel like the hubris of the coaching staff to employ their usual methods at the Olympics, where there's like incredible surveillance and security, and the French authorities watching everything like a hawk, like that was so stupid that I feel like the repercussions for this will be felt for a very long time. That being said, the actual crime itself, like I don't feel like that it is a major competitive advantage to do what Canada did, and I think there's different way people go about this, but the idea of like quote unquote spying, I think is done in many different ways whether it be without a drone or with a drone. So like I think like the actual act itself, I feel less like dropping monocles about it and fainting at the idea of us doing it. But I do think there's like a gap here in the sense of like how Canadians perceive themselves and like how like what it takes to win, which makes me feel a bit grimy to say the last part. But like the idea of Canada never being like, we could never do this, or like that's not something we would do to win, or like we do things the right way. Like, let's be serious here. What the fuck are we talking about when it comes to that? Like, that's insane. It's truly insane. And I think the funny part is we are trying to get an edge in every way we can. And like, I think John Herdman, whether or not he was the mastermind or not, and it's reportedly, we don't know for a fact that he was, but like the idea that they had to institute these things to get on like the same level as the rest of the world kind of checks out when you look at how Canada has done the last 6 or 7 years.
Well,
so I think, yeah.
Yes and no, right? He checks notes from the defending gold medalists. So it's not exactly like this is a small plucky underdog who's coming into this.
No, but I think they brought the things in that they knew worked elsewhere, but I think there was a naivete about what it took probably. And once you have Bev Priestman letting HR know that someone does not want to spy for her, you created an insane paper trail that'll get you caught. Like, I think the players are incredible. Like the fact that they won all 3 games, and 2 of them after the point punishment. Like, it's one of the greatest sports accomplishments I think in our country's history. But it's a situation of our own doing, which makes it almost like the perfect Canadian sports story, because like it has all the elements of joy, pride, but also like embarrassment and shame, and people being angry at journalists for reporting on the story, which is another thing of like just media literacy being in the absolute toilet. In not just this country but overall. Like, it has everything, and it's one of those things that soccer is continuously making headlines for hilarious reasons, and it makes me laugh just considering my career trajectory, just not picturing it happening like this maybe 10 years ago, but it's pretty remarkable.
What a story. I think there's a couple of points here. Firstly, when anyone ever uses the phrase like, we don't do that, or this is not who we are, you absolutely are, immediately after the thing happening. It's like shooting happens in local town. This is so unexpected. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is. Secondly, what on earth were France doing in the 90th minute to concede a goal like that? They did not. It's truly remarkable set of naivety from a set of players there. And thirdly, so obviously former Leeds manager Marcelo Bielsa caught in similar circumstances in terms of filming opposition and going through this. Like, I've already lived through this story once in a different capacity, and Bielsa's on record. Like, they gave a exceedingly long, I think it's nearly a 60-minute press conference, complete with PowerPoint presentation, sort of outlining and saying how this did not give us an advantage, like, because the amount of data that's available out there, every match is televised, what you can actually get out of a training session, there's not enough there to demonstrate that this is a sizable advantage for a team to get. I do think that's a little bit different in women's sport and in the position of women's football in general, just given that a lot of those things don't translate as well over from a professionalized men's game as well. So I do think there's something that's lost in that. Whilst at the same time, I think it is an interesting question to ask. How much of an advantage can you get when you kind of know what formation everyone's going to play? You know all these players like the back of your hand. Does it actually do anything? Or are we just kind of being, this is just a spirit of the game thing?
I would feel a lot differently about it, I guess, if this was a one-off and Canada was doing something no one else was doing. But I think we know that's not the case. I think it was just the way it went down really, really, robbed the players of this moment that was theirs, and they're taking it back. They're wrestling it back, to their credit. But also, like, at the beginning of the Olympics, this was the only story. Like, athletes were competing everywhere, and this was the only thing we were talking about. So in that regard, it's shitty. But like, I think the story now of what they can do with this It's remarkable. And then the Priestman emails things like butter emails, Hillary Clinton style. Like we're going back to 2016, dog. This is insane. Why did you email HR about that? I don't understand.
There's some very was the not to quote Jesus, not listen to me quoting Michelle Obama, but it's the this does have a direction.
The last person that I expected you to say. Okay.
Could have pulled anything from a bag from anywhere in the world. But wasn't she saying like she sat on boards and been in meetings everywhere, and the realization that people aren't that smart, no matter which position they're in? I feel like that rings very true here as well.
100%. Okay.
Can we do an Olympic episode that like separated from tennis to go into the feed?
Yeah,
let us know if you actually want to achieve that.
We probably will have to do this. Yeah, we'll probably have to do this. Is there 2 challenges remaining Olympics related? Because we can continue this, or
I mean, I feel like it shouldn't be, given that we've just done 25 minutes on non-tennis related things. I do have a 2 challenge remaining. If would you like me to go first, or do you have something that's
I would
Olympic?
Actually. No, I would. Please welcome you.
Okay, so I just wanted to shout out. I watched a documentary called Being Japanese by the YouTube channel Life Where I'm From, which is really, really good. And it's about a bunch of different people who have different backgrounds in Japan, in a nation that doesn't hand out citizenship so readily. And the language that is used, Japanese, oftentimes does have trouble in defining who is defined as Japanese, given the backgrounds of various people. And I thought it was wonderful. It's a really, really good documentary. It's free. You can find it on YouTube. But I think it also brought up a lot of things for myself, which is being a citizen of 2 nations and what it actually means to have lived 21 years in Britain and grown up there, and then living 13 years in Canada and spending my adult life there and feeling, am I truly Canadian? Do I have the passport? I'm a citizen of the country. Like but I don't really have the cultural fluency, perhaps. I didn't grow up with those sort of things. I don't have the shorthand that a lot of people use, maybe in terms of how people hold themselves. It's not quite there. Do I feel British? Yes, I do, but I kind of don't at the same time because I've not been there for a while. So I just thought it was a really good documentary of answering some of those questions, and it really rang true to me.
Wonderful, sir. I went to a live podcast taping, podcast show. Yeah, the first ever one of those.
Open era.
Yeah, no, it's a lie. I think I've been to a few of those, but I went to Comedy Bang Bang live in Toronto. Not sure if you've heard of that show, Simon.
I have heard of it, but I've never listened to it.
Okay. So I went with my sister, who's also a fan, and we had a great time. But like, it was one of those moments where like you think something is like not that popular, or like kind of like your thing, and you're like, oh, I wonder what other freaks are going to be here for this. And then we got to the venue, and the line was literally streets long, Simon. Like easily the biggest line I've ever been in to get into a show. And it was remarkable. It was crazy how many people showed up, and it makes sense that they're on a North American tour. But yeah, it was great. And it was just one of those funny things. I thought I was so cool, but really, this is a podcast with thousands and thousands of fans.
Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? How these, what were once thought as niche sort of media pieces have now spawned into their own, and have been that way for a very long time. It has to be said. This is not a new thing, but there's a reason that I think the podcast market got saturated is because it works, and people found audiences, and they resonated with the material that was being put out there. So I guess it isn't surprising. With all that being said, Dev, when is the Open Era live show happening?
Well, I was going to say the community aspect is, I think, the part that I underappreciated, and I felt it at that live show. So we should do it. I'm going to be on site at the National Bank Open in Toronto next week. If you're around, holler at me. I'll be at the Rogers tent a lot. So yeah, maybe we can do something.
Shall I show up?
Yeah, you're going to be in town too, aren't you?
I don't think so. Not that soon. I don't think it's possible.
We'll take these plans offline. But yeah, we got to plan the Open Era meetup. I think the New York City US Open thing has to happen, but we'll actually try and figure this out in the coming days, probably for next year. But anyways, I'm just rambling now. I'm going to plug our Patreon though, as a nod to our tennis community. I mentioned the one I found at that podcast taping, but our Discord is great. It's been awesome during the Olympics. It's awesome all the time. But join us on patreon.com/open era. Get the show early when we record, get it ad free, and get access to the tennis Discord Open Era, where we're chatting tennis plus everything else, news, politics, etc. all the time. And I think that's it for producer Dylan on the ones and twos, and for Simon. Thank you so much for listening to Open Era. We'll talk to you next week.